for this month's webinar from the Arizona Rural Development Council, hosted by Local First Arizona Foundation. For anyone who isn't familiar, the AZRDC and Local First Arizona Foundation put on a monthly webinar that addresses various issues that are common and surround the development process. These webinars focus on the development process specifically to rural areas. So this month, we're here to talk about what financial resources that we might be underutilizing in our surrounding community. And so this month's titled, Raising Capital, Raising the Bar. So before we get started, I just want to go over some housekeeping rules. For audio and visual, for audio, make sure that the volume is at your appropriate desired level. So you can turn it up, turn it down. If you're having trouble hearing, make sure it's high enough. For visual, make sure all programs or other windows are closed so that it helps with making sure there isn't too much distraction from the platform. And then for severe issues, log off and log back onto the platform if something serious is happening. The webinar is being recorded and will be made available to you afterwards. It usually takes about a week, but I will email it out to everyone. And in terms of question and answer, we do allow for clarifying questions after the presenters give their initial presentations. We hope that this goes no more than like 2 to 5 minutes, because at the end of all of the presentations, which there will be 3, we'll have a full-on question and answer at the end. And so for the Q&A, we ask that participants type their question into the chat box, which you see we have this main chat. And I asked a prompt question who has been through a business loan process before. Just trying to engage sort of understanding a little bit better of our listeners and participants. And I'd like to thank everyone who's listening statewide. We have some people from New Mexico, Ajo, Bisbee, Superior, Kearney. So thank you all. Now, I'm Maya, and I'm the Rural Program Coordinator for Local First Arizona Foundation. My background is in community development and sustainable tourism development. I've also worked with natural resource management in rural communities. So just a little bit about myself. And our presenters, here we have Miss Karen LaFrance, who's had a long career in community economic development, strategic planning, business management, small business lending, microloan programs, community organizing. She definitely is in the community and financial resource knowledge. She's started 2 community-based development organizations in Pittsburgh and Mesa, and is currently the project manager for Rebuild Superior, Inc. We also have Mr. Eric Marcus, who is the Chief Administrative Officer of the NARBHA Institute, which is responsible for program strategy, developing partnerships, new horizons, including sustainable impact and disruptive technology. Additionally, he has responsibility for the Sustainable Economic Development Initiative subsidiary, which promotes sustainable economic prosperity in northern Arizona through ecological health, social equity, and resilient economy. So you can't tell just by these brief bios, because there is way more. These 2 individuals know a little something about raising capital. So we're definitely going to let them get started as soon as possible. But just one thing to go over, what we hope that you will take away is the 2 most important questions every small business should ask. What does small business lender look like or look for when reviewing a loan application? What is the Community Reinvestment Act and how to leverage that resource? The 3 most important lessons in grant writing and the critical importance of preparation, proofreading, and third-party review. So we're going to get started here with Mr. Eric Marcus. And thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much, Maya. I'm very happy to be here. I want to thank all of you who are attending. Thank you for joining Karen and I this morning. I'd like to start out the program by talking about how small businesses and entrepreneurs can work with economic development organizations, especially in the context of microlending. So let me take you to our first slide. In this slide, we talk about how small businesses are the cornerstone of rural economic development. And in fact, in economic development throughout the state of Arizona. I think it's interesting to note that, that Alabama paid Mercedes the equivalent of $233,333 per job to recruit Mercedes to build a plant in their state. That's according to the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis. Nissan was paid $155,000 per job by the state of Tennessee, according to the Nashville Tennessean. So you can see that trying to attract these very large corporations to come into your region is extremely expensive. And in fact, I would argue really cost prohibitive for the state of Arizona, and especially for rural economic development within the state. So the question then becomes, if we're not going to be able to attract those people, if we can't afford to do that, then what can we do? What should we do? And I think the focus really should be on economic gardening, growing our own. You know, we have 3 major statewide universities that are generating thousands of very intelligent students each year who can enter the workforce if there's an opportunity. And small business may very well represent that opportunity. On this slide, we've noted that 50% of private sector employees are in small businesses. They pay 43% of all private sector payroll. They generate 64% of new jobs, and they hire 43% of our high-tech workers. So the role of small business is anything but small when it comes to economic development. But let's take a look at where does the money come from to start up these small businesses. I think one of the important things here, and I'm showing you this on the slide, owner and family equity is 36% of the source for startup financing. So when we ask where does the startup capital come from, most of the startup financing, in fact, starts right at home. And in fact, if we look at the next 2, business loans at 17% and personal loans at 12%, we could pretty much bet that those are also linked to there being owner funding. Lenders want to know that you, the business owner, the entrepreneur, have a very real stake in the game. If we take a look at our next slide, you can see how small business financing develops over the life cycle of an enterprise. But I think the important thing to note here is, while public stock sales are exciting and business banking loans are exciting, venture capital, it all starts down here with private loans and personal lines of credit, credit cards, personal funds. So again, I'm underlining the fact that if you are interested in starting up a small business, if you're an entrepreneur, you need to recognize that your startup capital is going to need to start right at home. Let me tell you a little bit about the SETI approach to small business lending. As Maya mentioned, SETI is the Sustainable Economic Development Initiative. And we're an organization that's focused on economic development through small businesses and entrepreneurs. And so we established a program that we call Dollars for Dreams. And Dollars for Dreams, Dollars for Dreams is a program that lends up to $5,000 in the first round and higher amounts subsequently at a rate of 3.5% for up to 2 years. We don't require collateral. We don't require a positive credit history. This is an opportunity for small businesses and entrepreneurs to get that initial capital they need to start out. As I've shown here on the slide, we've raised over $130,000 for this revolving loan program and have made loans to a variety of different people. In fact, if you take a look at the next slide, you'll see here are the faces of Dollars for Dreams. We have women-owned businesses, Hispanic-owned businesses, eco-friendly local businesses. We have Native American-owned businesses. Our goal here was to use our ability to raise funds to be able to support an economic gardening initiative. If we take a look at the next slide, here's a typical quote. I brought two of these in. This is an organization called Quality Connections that wanted to start out a job training program for people with severe disabilities. And they just needed $5,000 to get started. And we were able to lend that to them. Another example in the next slide is a gentleman who wanted to start a guitar studio with both in-person and online programs. I think one of the interesting things about our program is we don't simply write checks. Yes, we do provide that initial funding, but more importantly, we provide mentoring and coaching in addition to that funding and some direct support. We've written public relations releases. We've done all kinds of things. Our goal is to ensure that our client is successful. And I think one of the things that's been interesting to me, and you see it in these quotes, is one of the biggest benefits that our clients have told us is, you believed in my dream. And we needed somebody who could believe in us. As we move to the next slide, just to give you an idea, we lend in the 5 northern counties of Arizona. The next 3 bullets are important because it's how our program works. We're a 501c3, so the first thing we do is we determine, is this loan going to benefit the community? And it needs to actually benefit the community at least as much as it benefits the individual applicant. We then make sure that the loan fulfills an economic development need. Are we actually going to be growing the economy in our communities? And it's only third that we look at evaluating the likelihood that the loan's going to be repaid. So you can see this is a very different view versus a standard bank, for example, that might very well have put that repayment criteria as number 1. What do we look for? And what do most lenders look for? And I think this is an important thing for any of you who are considering your own businesses. We're going to want to see projected income and expense. This doesn't have to be a detailed business plan, although that's always nice to see. But it can, in fact, be a pro forma of what you project your income to be and what you expect your expenses to be over some period of time. It may be the first 6 months, it may be the first year. We then want to see owner's related experience. So let's say that you come to me and you say, Eric, we're interested in starting up a restaurant. Should be a logical question for me to ask is, have you ever worked in a restaurant? You say, well, no, I haven't actually worked in a restaurant, but my friends all tell me I'm a great chef. Well, we're going to probably give you a prescription that says, we think you should work in a restaurant for at least a year. Go out there and get some front of the house experience, some kitchen experience, really understand what's involved in owning a restaurant. On the other hand, if you came to me and said, I'm interested in starting a restaurant, Eric, and I've got 5 years worth of experience at the front of the house, and I've got 5 years worth of experience in the kitchen, I'm going to be much more likely to want to make that loan because I'm going to recognize that you understand the ups and downs of the business. You understand how it all works. I do look at past payment history. As I said, we don't require a positive credit history. We've had numerous clients who came to us with negative credit histories, but they were able to explain them and tell us what they did that was different so that they wouldn't end up back in that situation again. I look at the use of loan proceeds. How are you going to use the money? Now, sometimes when a client comes to us, they'll tell us, "Oh, we're going to use it to buy equipment. We're going to do some leasehold improvements." But it doesn't have to be tangible. It can be we're going to use the money to do marketing. We're going to use Facebook to do some marketing, and we need a consultant who's going to help us do that. So it's important for the lender to understand what role we as a lender play in the success of your business. And then we want to make sure that you've met all the applicable license requirements. So if it's a food establishment, we want to know that you've met the county's requirements. If you're selling a product, we want to know that you have sales tax. We want to know that you have an employer identification number, if that's appropriate. We want to understand how you're organized. So all of those factors are important to us. But I also wanted to end this part of the presentation with a discussion of some of the key questions that you as a small business owner and entrepreneur have to be asking before you invest your own time and your own money in this business. Number one, really understand your value proposition. And what I underline here is know what your unique and differentiable proposition is. What makes your product or your service unique and differentiable? And keep in mind, if you don't have anything that makes you unique and differentiable, then you've essentially become a commodity business, and the only thing you're going to be able to compete on is price. But value propositions can include things like cost savings and benefits, convenience, revenue enhancements. So very important to really hone in before you start on anything, before you go to the lender, with an understanding of what your value proposition is, so that you can then present to them who you really are and why you're going to be successful. You need to know who is your ideal customer. It's amazing to me how many times I talk to entrepreneurs and they don't know who their ideal customer is. You need to know who you're selling to. And there are many reasons for this. It will define how you target your marketing. It will define how you set your pricing. So really critical for you to take the time to know who your ideal customer is and to know how they think, what they read, what they look at. You need to know your costs, your fixed costs as well as your variable costs. You need to know how and what your competitors charge. So not only do I want to know what they charge for similar product, but I want to know, do they bundle with other products and services? Do they productize? Do they servicize? And a productize is you have a service and you sell a corollary product with it. Let's say you have a cleaning business and clients tell you, well, you have I love the smell of the place when I come in the morning. You could turn around and sell the products that you use in your service. Same thing can work the other way around. Understand how they charge, what they charge. And then really know your customer well enough to understand what they're willing to pay. And finally, ask yourself, what causes a customer to conclude that they either paid too much or got a great deal? I remember when I went out and bought a car a couple of years ago, I had done all my homework and I walked away realizing that I got a great deal. I saved $3,000 more than I really thought I ever would. And you can bet that I went out and told people about that. But I would have told 2 or 3 times that many people if I thought I had paid too much and I didn't have the same kind of experience. I think it's really important as an entrepreneur or a small business person to recognize that it's not good enough to simply satisfy your customers. You have to delight your customers. So I'm going to leave it there. Maya, do we have any clarifying questions?
Yeah. So this is a moment where if any of our participants have just any really quick questions, as we call them, clarifying questions, feel free to type them out in the chat box as we prepare for our next presenter. And in this moment, as we wait just to see if there's any questions, Does anyone know what the community feel free to type yes or no. That's what our next presentation is going to be on. Okay, so we have 2 questions. Do you provide technical assistance or stick to the funding part? Eric?
Yes, and I see the question. We do provide technical assistance, and in fact, what I've tried to describe as a major part of the Dollars for Dreams program is that we don't simply write a check. We in fact write a check and combine that with mentoring and coaching. So there's an ongoing relationship that we create. To give you an idea of how important that really is, our default rate over the course of 3 years of running this program is 2.33%. That is a really enviable rate. I don't think you're going to find any retail banks that have that kind of a low default rate. We have that because the important thing to us is not simply to be repaid, but to make sure that our clients are generating new jobs and are successful. And I noticed the other question is about where, and yes, we do only lend in the northern Arizona counties. So Mojave, Yavapai, Coconino, Apache, and Navajo counties. But there are other organizations like us in other regions.
Great. And maybe we can lend out, or later we can follow up with what some of those other organizations are for our Southern Arizona listeners. And then one more quick question, and then we'll hold the rest of the questions until the end. And that question is, does the loan repayment pay for the cost of your organization?
And the answer to that question is no, it does not. When we started this program, the goal was to raise funds from outside sources, and we did that. We have foundations, we had banks, we had people who, in fact, made some investments under the Community Reinvestment Act, which you'll hear about from Karen in a few moments. And so far, we've raised $130,000. Our goal is to get to $200,000, and I think we will achieve that within the next year. And so that allows the program to continue to meet the need. We are fortunate that it is one of the many programs of the NARBA Institute, and the NARBA Institute is focused on integrated well-being, which includes all the social determinants of health. Hard to be healthy if you're not employed. So one of the major social determinants of health is, in fact, helping to generate new jobs. So we're fortunate that the NARBA Institute covers our operating expenses, and we're able to use all of the money that we raise solely for our revolving loan fund. And we set the rate at 3.5% because that was the prime rate. And we said our customer is just as important, if not more important to us than the biggest customers are to the largest banks. And we'll offer the same rate. So that's where we came in with the 3.5% rate. Thank you, Maya.
Yeah, thank you. All right, so we're going to hand it over to Ms. Karen LaFrance, and she will be talking about the Community Reinvestment Act. Thank you, Karen.
Well, hello, everybody. As Maya said, I'm going to talk about the Community Reinvestment Act, and you have one slide. And when you get a copy of this webinar, you will see that there are hot links in it, and you can go explore a lot of things about the Community Reinvestment Act. So I'm going to talk a little about this seminal law in our array of banking laws in the United States. And a little about the rather large and extensive system of financial resources in communities across the country that's resulted. I do have a background, like Eric, in very small business lending, both here and abroad. And before we start on this, I have a book that I reread from time to time, which is inspirational about micro lending. And some of you will know of Muhammad Yunus from Pakistan, who wrote a book called Banker to the Poor. And he's the father of microenterprise and of lending circles. And I highly recommend it as an inspirational. It's a quick read. Yes, I know it's not about the United States, but it really has driven the microenterprise and micro financing industry around the globe. So I recommend that. So now let's get to the Community Reinvestment Act, the other side of the brain, I guess. So many of you have heard about redlining. Redlining was a practice of banks having a map of areas where they loaned money, and they would draw a red line around areas. They said, don't do a loan in this area. And they were caught, several banks were caught red-handed, no pun intended, in Chicago in the 1970s, and community organizers went to town and ended up building coalitions that resulted in the Community Reinvestment Act, passed in 1977, that said, if you say your area is all of Illinois, then you have to loan in low and moderate income neighborhoods as well as upper income neighborhoods. Just real quick, several other federal laws followed this law to put the teeth into the Community Reinvestment Act. And let me explain what teeth means. The Act said banks should do this. The other laws said you will do this. And one of the most important is called the Home Mortgage Disclosure Act, HMDA, as folks in the business like to call it. And it requires banks to be examined. And you'll hear this word when you talk to friends that work in banks, and they say, oh my gosh, the examiners are here this week. Well, the examiners come from federal agencies that regulate banks. And every few years, every bank, no matter where it is organized, what state or whether it's a national bank, etc., they all get examined on CRA compliance. And you can explore a lot more about this, but quite frankly, the teeth in this whole set of laws is if a bank wants to acquire another bank or merge with another bank, and their CRA records are looked at very carefully in any kind of mergers. So how does this relate to financial resources for, I'm going to say, low and moderate income neighborhoods, because many rural areas fall in that distinction. So the banks responded, I would say slowly, over decades, to the need to do different kinds of lending in these areas. What happened over time is that they formed collaborations with community organizations. And by doing that, they were able to open up, this is another rubric here, new markets. They were able to open up new markets in their lending portfolios. And the way they did that was that they worked with community organizations to combine resources, both public and private. Essentially, the banks began to make money, okay? And there's several structures which have developed that help this happen. The making of the money has actually resulted in folks getting loans that didn't have access to loans before to buy houses and start businesses. And the record is well documented of how this has happened, has actually turned around whole neighborhoods and whole communities. Very quickly on the structures that will potentially be important to you who are in rural communities in Arizona. The regulations that banks face, other than this regulation, okay, tell them don't make risky loans, don't make small loans because that takes a lot more staff time, don't make loans to start up businesses because it's too risky. Don't make loans when the appraisal doesn't fit on a housing project where there's extensive rehab needed. Things like that. So they meaning communities, formed these entities like IRICs that make loans not according to bank rules, but according to rules. Like we call it double or triple bottom line. They look at equity, social equity issues, as well as the bottom line. And they're called Community Development Financial Institutions, CDFIs. They're also involved in a new thing, which has been really cool because lots of investors like it, called a New Markets Tax Credit. This has brought resources to low and moderate income neighborhoods and to rural areas. I want to just hit on a couple of things about this system. The system has been around now for decades. And so there are entities called intermediaries. And some of you may know about LISC, Local Initiatives Support Corporation, LISC. LISC started out small in New York, but it was kind of interested in some community development work that was going on around the country. So they formed their own offices and developed their own collaborations. Well, over time, like many things, LISC got big. And I, quite frankly, remember the time that you could go to the LISC rural office and say, I'm in a rural community in Arizona, and I would like to take advantage of your low interest loans for a business development program or for housing rehabilitation. They would say, sure, I'll come out and visit you. Well, those days are no longer in place. So now LISC in Arizona has two entities it works with. And the one that's probably most known to all of you, although if anyone's from Western Arizona, you can help me out on the other one. But one is Chicanos por la Causa, which is based in Phoenix, but works all over the state. It is a designated local initiative support corporation and has resources for your projects. It also has a loan fund called Prestamos, and it has new market tax credits. Now, why are these important to you in rural communities? New markets tax credits, this is big money. It's funded by banks, and it provides funds for developments, specifically developments. In other words, if you're developing your downtown and you've got a large parcel and you've got several ideas of entities and businesses that'll go in there, and you go to a bank and a bank says, well, we have a relationship with new markets tax credits. Don't be turned off by it. That's a good thing. Okay? Remember that, new markets tax credits. I don't want to run out of time here, so I'm going to ask how much I have left because I have one more set of things to share with you. Let's see. Looks like I might have a few minutes.
Yeah.
I'm sorry?
I think that you have a couple minutes still. Yeah, about 10.
Okay, perfect. So, quite frankly, the money that goes into the system on the community side is foundation money, bank foundation money, and federal money, and state money. Okay? So you can readily understand that advocacy is always necessary to make sure that these funds are still flowing to these entities and then out into your communities. So in this day and age where everything is under scrutiny, okay, even the Community Reinvestment Act, which everybody is totally worked into how they work and banking and everything, even the basic act is under scrutiny. So I want to give you a quick list of the advocacy groups which provide the best information about this whole system and how it can help you and how these entities can help you directly. National Community Reinvestment Coalition, ncrc.org. I can get you this list if you want, just email me directly. The Opportunity Finance Network, the CDFI Coalition, Low Income Housing Coalition, Center for Community Change. Those are just a few of the entities that do research, keep the data, provide referrals. And by the way, in this large system that we can't talk about much longer because I have to get off, there are 16 community development financial institutions in Arizona. Half of them are in Native American communities. There are 14 entities that do new markets tax credits in partnership with banks. These are all, this is all information you can get from the CDFI fund so that you know that you have access to these entities in any place in Arizona. Most of these new market tax credit projects are Arizona is eligible for. So with that, I'm going to finish up and see if you have any any immediate questions, and then maybe we can talk later. Thank you very much.
Do we have any clarifying questions for Karen at this moment right now? And in the interim, I just want to let everyone know that earlier this morning I sent out an email with a resource that Eric wanted everyone to have for his next presentation on grant writing. So if you haven't opened that yet, please check your email, and there should be a PDF with that resource that Eric would like everyone to look at for his next presentation. In that email, there's also a Word document with another resource from one of our board members on a initiative that helps you assess your financial capital from dreambuilder.org. So it looks like we are good on the clarifying questions, and we are going to switch over to our session on grant writing. Thank you so much, Karen, for your presentation.
And again, happy to be here talking about a subject that's near and dear to many of our hearts, grant writing. And my hope here is to give you some ideas, maybe some different ways of thinking about the very practical nuts and bolts work involved in writing grants. And I want to start with an acknowledgement. Anne-Marie Mackler is the person who taught me grant writing 4.5 years ago. I had never written a grant. So for those of you out there who are thinking, geez, I've never written a grant, sounds like it's hard work and probably a very specialized skill, I will tell you that as a result of what she taught me, which I have included in this presentation, I have been fortunate enough to write, to get 15 out of 17 grants that I've applied for in the last 4 years. And I really believe that it is based on what Anne-Marie taught me and what I'm hoping to convey to you during this next 15 or 20 minutes. She's one of the top grant writers in Northern Arizona with great experience as both a grant writer, reviewer, and a judge. So let's start out by talking about the basics of grant writing. I start out by saying dream your dream. And the reason I say that is because grant writing starts out by defining a project that you, the writer, are truly enthusiastic about. Okay? If you don't have excitement and enthusiasm for the project, it's going to be very difficult for you to convey that to anyone else. So as you're looking at a project that you want to seek funding for, really define it in terms that create a dream that you can believe in, that you're dreaming, that you can see and visualize. Second, and this is probably the most important concept that I would say in grant writing, you have to, as the grant writer, convey your passion for that project to the person who is going to be writing the checks. It's really that simple. That's what grant writing is about. When you're a grant, I've been a grant judge and reviewer, you get hundreds of applications, and frankly, most of them you'd love to be able to fund. You'd like to be able to write a check to all of those people who have communicated with you, because you look at this and say, wow, these are just great ideas and great things I'd like to do. But the ones that are going to get funded are the ones where you as the grant writer have transferred your passion, your enthusiasm, your excitement to the person who's going to write that check. And I want to give you an example of what I mean by conveying your passion and how important it really is. And I call this fungi and heartstrings. The reason I call it that is I was asked to review an application before it was submitted to a grantor. And it was really for a very good program. The program itself was titled, the project itself was titled, Using Lichens to Monitor Climate Change. Well, that sounds interesting, okay? For those of you who are not familiar with a lichen, lichens are those little green things that grow on the sides of rocks. And it turns out that lichens can be used to monitor climate change. But you know, if you've got 100 applications using lichens to monitor climate change and a description of that really goes into the detail of how equipment will be used to monitor climate change using lichens, I don't know about you, but it doesn't pull at my heartstrings. And I'll bet it doesn't pull at yours either. But the more I read into the grant, the more I realized that that wasn't really what this was about. That the exciting thing about this grant was it was designed for fifth graders. So this is going to be fifth graders learning how to use all this equipment, learning about scientific method, learning about approach, learning how to use the equipment in ways that would allow them to be a scientist. Well, I started out and I changed the title of the grant to I'm Liking It, Turning Fifth Graders into Scientists. Do you see the important shift that occurs there? It's the same grant. I didn't change what they were actually going to do with the money. Okay? But by talking about turning fifth graders into scientists, I'm now able to pull at your heartstrings in a way that monitoring climate change simply isn't going to be able to do. So the first thing that I suggest to you is think about what makes you passionate about this project and find a way to capture that passion, okay, both in the title and in the actual description of what you're going to do. I can't overemphasize the importance of pulling at heartstrings by really writing in a passionate way. Many times a grant writer gets to a place where they are so focused on the trees that they don't see the forest. And it's so critical that you step back. The person who's writing the grant doesn't need all of the weeds. What they really need are all of the trees in this metaphor. All they really need to understand is why this is going to change things and why they should feel passion for it. The second most important thing about grant writing is read and follow the grant instructions. And I know that seems really simple, but I will tell you that at least 25% of the grants that I either review or am a judge on, the grant writer did not read the instructions and did not follow them. I'll give you an example. I recently put out a grant program that was designed for certain kinds of work, and 25% of the people who applied for something that wasn't in that funding category. They had not really read the instructions, and so as it turns out, they spent a lot of time writing a grant for which their project was simply not matched. So please read and follow the grant instructions, and I strongly recommend read all the grant instructions, read over the entire grant before you ever start doing any writing. And lastly on this slide, be clear and concise. A lot of times there'll be a certain amount of space for an answer, a certain number of words. And if a grant allows 300 words, but you can do it in 200, all the better for you. You are doing the grant reviewer a huge favor when you don't use all 300 words, when you are concise and clear and it's easy for me to understand. I was a judge on a recent grant program, and there were several of the grants where the judges and I all sat, my fellow judges and I all sat together and said, I don't have any idea what they're asking for. I don't know what they're going to use the money for. I don't understand what the outcomes are. You don't want to do that because when I get 100 grants and 25 of them I don't understand and aren't clear, they're probably not going to get funded. At least they're not going to get funded to the tune of the ones that I really can very clearly understand. So I want to call your attention to the PDF that Maya sent out at the beginning of this program. The slide that you see in view has a picture of what's called a project profile and planning worksheet. This was developed by Anne Marie Mackler, who I mentioned earlier. This is a great outline. I strongly suggest that if you come up with a project, okay, the first thing you do is fill out this form, okay, and the specific grant itself is really independent of this. No matter what grant you apply for, if you can fill out this form completely, okay, then you will be in a great position to be able to work on the grant. And it forces you to really think through the project all the way through before you actually start writing the individual grant. So I'm going to take you through a few points here. Again, this is good for any grant that you might apply. The first item on there is your opportunity to tell the story of your organization. And this is really critical because you're asking someone to write you a check. Okay? Well, imagine somebody comes up to you and asks you to write them a check. Don't you want to know who you're writing the check to? Independent of the project itself, I want to establish the credibility of the organization that's asking for the mission. Who are you? How long have you been around? You know, are you an organization that's been around for 50 years doing good things in the community? Tell me that. Do you have experience doing similar kinds of projects? Tell me that. This is your opportunity to really expand on your credibility as an organization. In the second item, I'm looking for you to define the need. What are you passionate about here? What are you going to fulfill? This is where you really put your heart into the worksheet and really describe what it is that you want to change. And in the third point, what does success look like? If you get this funding and you're successful in doing what you've described you want to do, what exactly does your success look like? Paint me a picture of that vision that you're passionate about creating. In the fourth bullet, I want you to give me just a basic outline of your approach. Don't get too far into the weeds here, but give me an idea of how you're going to do it in a way that helps to further your credibility. I want to know that, yeah, you've told me you're a great organization. You've told me a project that you've made me passionate about. You've showed me what success looks like. Now tell me enough about how you intend to get there so that I believe you can achieve that goal. And then partners in item number 5. Many times I talk to people and say, well, we didn't want to tell people that we were going to use a partner because we were concerned that if we had partners, then they might not want to give us the money or they might want to give us less money. That is really not true. Most grantors are happy to see partners because they realize that the more partners, the more the risk is mitigated. So tell us who you're going to work with and what role they play and give us a little bit of their credibility, which will in fact build on your credibility. In the 7th and 8th bullets, we talk about your budget. Almost every grant's going to require you to provide some kind of budget. What are the resources you need? It's really important here to be comprehensive. You want to put in-kind contributions. You want to put in sales tax if you have to pay that. Delivery charges. I worked with one grantor, one grantee rather, who got their grant. They asked for $15,000 for a great program. They got the $15,000. And then when they actually went to spend it, they realized they'd forgotten to put in sales tax and delivery charges. So they ended up being $500 or $600 short. So you don't want to have to go back to the grantor and say, I can't do what I said I was going to do because I forgot to ask for everything I needed. So they had to actually go out and raise more money to cover the sales tax and delivery charges, when in fact that grantor probably would have paid for it had they been asked. The ninth item here is one of the critical items on this document. We say in this document to do it in one sentence. I'll give you an exercise that we're going to talk about in a few minutes where you can use 2 sentences and up to 50 words. But this is where you're going to create your elevator speech. Make it clear about what you're going to do, who you're going to do it with, when, why, and put passion in it. Okay? It is so critical that your elevator speech make me passionate enough to want to read the rest of your grant application. And then lastly, because you may have done this worksheet independent of a grant, put in some keywords here. Here's where you're going to put in the keywords that you're going to be able to use to search for potential grantors and potential grants. So again, I cannot stress enough the importance of this PDF, and it applies to any grant, and it is really useful, and it will really help to clearly organize your thinking. So highlighting a couple of the key points here, you need to know your organization, your mission, and your purpose. This goes to credibility, and it goes to alignment, which we'll talk about in a moment. The key underlying question here, if you're asking me to write you a check, why should I trust you with my money? How can you demonstrate your credibility, your reliability? And you can do that by telling me about your years of experience, by telling me about past related projects, things of that sort. And then lastly here, what's really broken and who's suffering? This is your opportunity to pull at my heartstrings. You know, typically this tends to be easier when children or animals are involved, right? How can you make it a passion or transfer passion when the request is about economic development, a topic of this call, this webinar? You know, you need to be able to put a face on it. You need to be able to tell stories about people who can't get funding and who are ending up on government assistance, even though they've got a great idea that could not only employ them, but could employ 10 or 15 other people. This is your opportunity to tell the story and transfer your passion for what you want to do. I've got kind of a shorthand here called Be Smart. You want to be specific in your grant application. You want to be measurable. It's so important that not only tell me what you're going to do, but how are you going to measure whether you were successful? And that's not only a list of the metrics, but it's a list of the tools that you are going to use. Are you going to do surveys, focus groups? Are there other ways for you to measure the outcomes? And be assertive in your grant. I can't tell you how many times I see coulds, woulds, can, might. You, in order to convey passion, you need to be assertive, be proactive. Tell me what you're going to do. What are the results going to be if only I funded you? And the R can be any one of these three. It's got to be readable, it's got to be relevant, and it's got to be realistic. And you've got to put some time limits on it. You know, the Miss America speech about I'm going to bring about world peace isn't time limited, and it isn't terribly realistic. So if you want me to write you a check, you want to be realistic and time limited. So then tell me, Again, what are you going to change and how are you going to do it? And it's really important here to tie what you want to change, okay, to your organization's mission. Okay, SETI is an economic development organization. When I go out to raise money for our revolving loan fund, for example, I tie my request for that funding and how that program works and what it will achieve to our organization's mission and what we've done in the past. And then what are the steps? How are you going to achieve this? You don't have to have a 20-page project plan here, but you've got to have some clear definition of what are the steps that you're going to implement to make this work. It really goes to your credibility as much as it goes to my understanding of what you're going to achieve. This is where I want a reasonable time frame, measurement and proof of success. And then lastly, what are the next steps? So for example, in that climate change project that I talked about, turning fifth graders into scientists, it turns out once you bought that equipment, not only does next year's fifth grade class benefit, but many years of fifth grade classes afterwards are going to benefit. So tell me, what are the next steps after you've completed the project? How is this going to continue to pay dividends? Or if you're going to need more money, what's your plan to seek additional funding after this is over? Now you're almost done. This is such a critical step, proofreading and third-party review. And you need to do two different kinds. You need to proof and third-party review for content and for form. So I want somebody who knows what I'm doing to read this over and make sure that I haven't missed something, that it's right. So that from a content standpoint, I have in fact properly and fully explained what I'm here to achieve. But I also want a third party to review this. Maybe ask my neighbor, somebody who has only a vague idea of what I do for a living. And I want them to take a look at this and see, does this make sense? Because often grantors don't know very much about what it is that you do. They may not know the area that you're in. This is where you're going to catch things like acronyms that you use because you use them every day, but the grantor looks at them and goes, I have no idea what that means. And so it's critical that when you have a third party review this who has no real knowledge of what you do, that they can explain back to you what it is that they think that you're going to be doing. Now, I've enclosed an exercise here. This is something, when I actually do this as part of a full grant writing workshop, I ask the participants to do this. What I ask them to do is to, in 50 words or less, tell me what are you going to do with your project. So this is that item number 9 on the PDF that we sent out. Only I'm going to give you 2 sentences and up to 50 words. Okay, and I strongly suggest if you've got a project in mind, do this now. Do this on your own, and write it in a way that conveys your passion for this project, and give it to someone who doesn't know what you do, and ask these questions: is it clear? Is it concise? Do you understand what I want to do? Does it really pull at your heartstrings? And then the most common mistake that I see in these elevator speeches: did you bury the lead? Okay, the very first sentence needs to get me passionate and tell me what you're going to do. Okay, and put numbers in there. If you've got data, use some data. Tell me how many people are going to benefit. Okay, and don't bury that into the second sentence. Put that in the first sentence. Lead with your strongest argument. So that takes me up to the final, and that is you got funded. Now, who do you tell? Well, first off, the very first thing you do, and I do this when I know an award's coming in, I actually blank out half a day to be able to send out thank you notes to all the people who are funding me. So when those checks come in, that same day, okay, or the letter telling me I got the grant comes in, that same day I've already written a letter of thanks. And I've also identified who else I'm going to tell. I'm going to write a press release. I'm going to circulate that press release to the local papers, but I'm also going to, even for those of us in rural areas like our organization, I send it down to Phoenix. You'd be surprised how many times a Channel 3, for example, is looking for a good news story, and they'll pick it up. We've had them, send crews 150 miles north of Phoenix to cover a story that they thought was interesting. Decide what you're going to tell them, who you're going to tell, and of course, again, underlining, make sure to tell your funders that you appreciate them. And I strongly suggest at about 6 months, if it's a 1-year grant, at about 6 months, send them another letter and tell them, here's what your money went for. Here's how we've been able to change lives. You were passionate about this when you wrote us a check. Now you should be passionate and proud of the important role you have played in making this all come together. So, Maya, with that, I'm happy to turn this over for questions.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Eric, and to both of our speakers. So the floor is now open for questions. And if you have any, please continue to type them into the chat box, and we will get them to whichever speaker needs to address the question. As we sort of wait in the moment with Q&A, I'm going to just go over what's next. It looks like we have some questions that are being typed in. So we do have our webinar next month called Can You Hear Me Now? Strategies for Rural Broadband Access. The promotion for that will be coming up soon. So we have one question. We have one comment, actually. The worksheet is useful. Thank you. And then we also have the question, how often, Eric, do you do grant writing workshops? Can you share a little bit more info on that? How long are they? What is their cost?
Sure, I'm happy to. I actually do them kind of on an on-demand basis. I don't have anything scheduled at the present time. I probably did 2 or 3 last month. And typically what happens is an organization will contact me and ask me if I'm interested in doing it. We'll talk about it, see what kind of a match we have, and then go from there. The most recent one I did was last week for a statewide group of conservation and ecology nonprofits who wanted to get an idea of how to do this. And typically they run about an hour and a half. I do them, obviously this format doesn't allow for interactivity, but I do it's a very interactive program. So it generally runs about an hour and a half.
Brilliant. And we have Eric's contact if you'd like to reach out further to him. I know Karen wanted to mention something a little bit about workshops as well. Karen, bring that up.
Yeah, thanks, Maya. I think I'm live right now, so I'll go ahead. I wanted to mention, and I ran out of time, but this whole thing about resources in rural areas for community development and small business development, financing, etc., is a huge, huge subject. And it's also relates so directly to the actual needs of the community and where the community wants to go, what its vision is. Relates very well to the grant writing comments you've heard about. But in terms of communities, it works also to have a vision and know where you're going. And I actually am offering anybody who's in this webinar, anybody who hears it, after it goes up online, I can come and talk to your group. I can do the 5-minute thing, I can do the 15-minute thing, or I could sit down with your leadership and have an in-depth discussion about what your needs might be. We are members of Local First Arizona, and I do this as a courtesy. So I just wanted to let everybody know that I can do that. There's so much that needs to be conveyed from old people like me who've been in this business a long time to younger and other generations who really could benefit from knowing some of these things, and I feel an obligation to pass it on. So feel free to share my info with anybody you think might be interested. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Karen. So definitely share that information, anyone. So just to continue with what's happening next, as I mentioned, we're going to have the registration for the next webinar coming out most likely by the end of this week or the beginning of next week. It's going to be on strategies for rural broadband access. It will be free. And if you haven't signed up yet for the Rural Policy Forum, it is an interactive, engaging conference. This year it's going to be held in Safford/Thatcher. It is just geared towards rural communities. We highlight Arizona rural communities. However, we have speakers and attendees from all around the country. Early bird registration will be ending July 7th, so you can look to the azrdc.org website for more information on that. And then we're going to have one of our Local First Arizona colleagues talk to you a little bit about what Independence Week is. Her name is Kendall. Here she is.
Hello, everybody. I just wanted to introduce myself. My name is Kendall Jones. I'm the Community Outreach Coordinator. So I work with Maya for these webinars that she's putting together. She does a fantastic job. So I just wanted to take a quick second of your time and let you know, if you already aren't a participant in our Independence Week. This is our summertime campaign. It runs from July 1st to July 9th, and it's a really, really great way to get your name out there. It's essentially a campaign where we print up golden coupons, and you as a participating business offer something for 20% off. So people go to our website, they get these coupons, they're either in print or they use them digitally, and you as a participating business can offer either a service or a product, whatever you would like the 20% off to be for this 1 week only. There's a lot of media around this. You might have already heard some of our commercials on KJZZ around Independence Week. We encourage everybody to at least visit the website and familiarize yourself. You can see what we've got going on for Independence Week if you visit us at localfirstaz.com/independence-week. I'm going to go ahead and type it into the chat box here, but again, if you are a business and you would like to participate, we highly encourage it. It does not cost. All you have to do is come up with whatever you would like to have the coupon for 20% off, and then we have a toolkit that we share, and that way you can get the word out and make sure that all of your employees are aware of the campaign as well. And with that, I'll turn it right back over to Maya.
And she is typing in her information to the chat box right now. So we are going to conclude this webinar. I'd like to once again thank all of our participants for engaging, and most importantly, I'd love to thank our speakers. This was extraordinarily informative, and to all the participants, keep signing up. Your participation lets us know that there is a need to continue dialogue on various topics pertaining to rural development. And I really hope that I see you all at the Rural Policy Forum. So have a great day, and we will be talking to you again soon. Thank you.